Hey, everybody. I'm going to dive in straight into the first slide. But when we think about this title of unlocking something so critical to a business, which is performance and efficiency across these complex environments, we first have to understand what's being locked and why. And when we think about unlocking efficiency and performance, it really comes back to this idea of the trade-offs at its core. And most of us know that as we build and deliver these services for our internal and external clients, we really have these trade-offs that are underlying and we're always trying to maintain and manage. And over the last 15 years for myself, spending time in this space, I've heard from customers on all ends uh, of the scale to which their environments are. No matter the size of your environment, this trade-off exists. And as we think about the services that we are providing, we really start to wane pretty heavily in on the performance aspect of this trade-off because we want our end user to have that experience. Uh, but doing so can force us to spend a bit extra. And managing that trade-off with compliance, meaning where things can live and how we've licensed and the scale at which we've deployed, also plays a major factor. So as we think about this demand shifting on all of the services we provide, this is a continuously fluctuating challenge. These trade-offs are moving in real time. As our consumers of these services use them, uh, we find ourselves in a place where we've got to maintain, manage these trade-offs in real time. And it's increasingly complex. And it's not our fault that the industry has kind of put us in a place where we're almost expected to fail, right? That desired state of managing those trade-offs really starts with as we put those platforms out there, as we build on this idea uh, of a specific platform to underlie a service, we really find that we know what that desired state is, right? Managing that trade-off is that desired state. But this industry kind of gives us this sense that as soon as we deploy that platform, we first got to start collecting that data, mainly to say, well, what is this thing actually doing? What's the utilization? How are folks consuming this service, this platform? But the reason we're collecting that data is for the sole purpose of alerting us, making us aware to when things are not really in the place they should be, when we're not in that desired state. And as we think about this alerting mechanism, it's strictly there to help us notify our people with the big arm, the long arm, uh, to go and find and try to remedy that scenario with the tools that they have at hand. And we find ourselves in somewhat of a loop. And this break fix loop is not new to any of us on this call. It's something that I have to preface the next few slides and why we set out on this journey of managing trade-offs is really because in this loop, the reason why it's so complex, and I can pose this out to the audience, and I'm sure you have a sense of it. Typically, the piece of this puzzle that's the most complex is the right side, mainly because this right side is only happening when stuff is on fire, when stuff has hit the fan, when things aren't operating in the place we want to be. And as we think about the industry on the left side, it's really failed us because it's telling us that we should probably shorten that mean time to alert or mean time to resolve by way of collecting more data, alerting on more data points, and really just flooding the scenario with, I don't actually know what's smoke and what's fire in these scenarios. So we have a complete disconnect between the viewing and the doing. And this at its core is a very manual, high risk and expensive process. We've all seen this. Maybe we we go out and we think about this right side a little bit more or the left side, but no matter how we look at it, our typical knee-jerk response is, let's just throw a little more money at it. Let's buy another monitoring tool. Let's invest in some level of process automation. Let's try to maybe take that left side, and if we've seen that alert enough times, let's try to automate those alerts. And I'm sure most of you have been able to automate to some extent some number of alerts that have come in at a rudimentary level, on a conditional level. If we see this scenario, then increase memory, then move this workload, etc. So I'll take a quick pause because I think from this perspective, and Sean, maybe there's some color that you'd like to add to it as well. This is where we typically see our clients that take that first step in to share with us the current mode or the current state. This is that loop that we're in.
Jimmy, I think you laid it out really well, and I think how you explained it, right? The break fix, and I think this is where a lot of the observability tools, a lot of the APM tools play in this space. And I think we just finished a session this morning on Instana. So whether a client is using Instana or Dynatrace, Datadog, AppD, it doesn't matter. They still fall in this loop and they still have this challenge. And I see a lot of those clients turning to Turbo, and maybe that will be a good segue, right? So like we clearly see that those clients have that pain, and those clients are, or those clients that use those tools still have a gap that they're trying to fill, and most often Turbo fills that gap for them. So
yeah, you're spot on. I think when we see this large investment into the APM side, it really gives us this ability to tap into the software defined aspects across the entire, whether it's on-prem, public cloud, or hybrid model. The fact that all of these knobs and levers that your guy with the long arm can pull is no longer a physical knob and lever, but rather software defined. We're now able to execute on that mean time to resolution in a more rapid way. And with the advancements and with technologies like Terraform, having those initial configurations set out the gate at the proper size also help us in quite some way. So I'll speak to, Sean, your point. Of all of these technologies that most of these folks have invested in already across their environment, we would love to tap into. So let me jump into that. If I shift over toward Turbonomic, and yes, this is a slide, but I'll bring this to life in a demo at the tail end of this exact component, which we call the application stack, the supply chain. All of the things within this supply chain, meaning your APM products will feed in all of your application data points to us via API. Your Kubernetes environments, regardless of where they live in the public cloud, on-prem, Tanzu, VMware, your AWS, your Azure Kubernetes environments, your on-prem data center storage components, the hosts, regardless of all these technologies, Turbonomic is able to pull in via API within the first 45 minutes and build that full map so we can then understand how to best resource and manage those trade-offs. The piece to the puzzle on understanding this demand fluctuating even better, because we can pull in all of that data via API, is because it's changing in real time, the demand that is, we then get a better understanding of all of the possible congestion points that can come up in the consumption model. Because we have an understanding of where the supply for that end user's application is coming from for memory, compute, storage, and all resources, we're able to then see how can we avoid all of these congestion points. As we think about the resulting pieces of the current state to that future state, when we think about that break fix loop, the left side and the right are really just a breakdown of war rooms that happen. And we've all seen or heard of the war room scenario where we've got different teams isolated with their own tools and their own databases collected for each of their tool sets. And without connecting and stitching the data points together, we typically end on it's the storage guy's fault. It's the application team's code. It's something along the lines of it's not me. That mean time to innocence is typically where these end up. So enough about the current mode. Let's pivot over toward why we're here and how we can propose a valid solution and what we've been delivering to clients. And I'll share some specific stories with that. So on to your point, customers have invested in APM products. They have invested in different platforms, containerized, traditional, cloud, or on-prem. All of the things that we've just talked through are fully compatible and ingestible into the system in less than 45 minutes, have a full app to infrastructure map for the sole purpose of driving action. That's our goal. And as we think about all of those different vendors and components from an API perspective, it's just a simple credentials game. And we typically start with read-only credentials to start that trust building exercise. When we think about building trust across this environment, it really has to start with the low-hanging fruit types of actions. And that's really just the placement type of actions, and even the start-stop related actions, where we clean up some maybe derelict items, we move standard workloads across nodes for better placement, and then the suggestion piece. So as we think about this crawl, walk, run, you have a very clear map of, we start with a manual click to execute on an action perspective, the ability to then schedule these actions to happen once we've built trust, integrations into things like a Terraform, a ServiceNow for a workflow, as we think about the configuration for a deployment, or even just the approval process of executing, having this system execute on an action the way that you and your organization typically deliver and drive these actions is key. And then being able to do all of this in real time is why the system really yields value to our clients. Everything you see along the right side here is that value in a very clear breakdown. And I want to show you exactly what it means to a few clients today. And I've got 3 client stories that I'll jump into in a case study. Before I do, Sean, anything you'd like me to touch on, or if there's something in the chat?
Yeah, no, I think this is great, Jimmy. I think what I wanted to also mention is, when I typically talk to clients on Turbo, what I hear is we do resource management, but how we do resource management is very different, right? With Turbo, one thing we do is, like, we are full stack aware, and we are also in the North Star for us is always performance. So we are very application aware. So any decisions we make sure the application doesn't suffer in any way. That kind of guarantee or that kind of SLA, no other resource manager can give, because when they do, like Jimmy was just talking, right? They're either reconfiguring the host or reconfiguring the CPU or memory. They cannot guarantee and say your application will not suffer in a bad way because of the changes they're making at any one particular layer. They're not full stack aware. And I think this is where Turbo shines, because whether it's scaling, everybody can scale up, but when it's scaling down safely, this is where a lot of engineers don't have the confidence, and where Turbo brings that confidence to the table, that we can tell you we can scale down safely without affecting your application performance. And that's what drives that decrease in waste, that increase in productivity, and everything that we were talking about, right? That requires taking away wasted resources, and we can do it in a safer way than anybody else.
Yeah, that's spot on. Having that full understanding of the implication of every change because you have that full stack, spot on. So we kind of talk about all of this in a theory, so to speak, but are people actually using this thing? A fully accessible case study on the website. This will all be sent out and accessible to you folks. And we think about Apis IT currently leveraging the software within that first 45 minutes of mapping and understanding, and then understanding the licensing components that some of the vendors put out there, in this case, VMware. We're able to then say, if we can run workloads on fewer nodes and in a more efficient way and improve performance, are there cost saving opportunities? In this case, yes, because we're able to downgrade to a specific tier of licensing and still deliver functionality that exists in that top tier native to Turbo on top of the savings. That's why customers like Apis with an on-prem licensing model made this investment. And as we think about a top automaker.
Even on that use case, Jimmy, I think you mentioned, right? VMware has changed their licensing model, and this has not only increased the need, and I think VMware is also, like Jimmy said, pushing clients to use the higher tier of licensing, where you're not using the base version of VMware, you're using a higher version with a lot of automation. With Turbo, you can actually do the base version, because Turbo brings you the other automation capabilities that you will typically use in a higher version. So one is you're using a cheaper version of VMware. The other is you're also using lesser VMware, because we are right sizing, we are removing all the waste. And I think this is a good story with this automaker. Go ahead, Jimmy.
Yeah, that's exactly it. The transition from the case study with one client to the next, and these keep coming. We've got countless thousands of these use cases. This one in particular with one of the top automakers on-prem, uh, being able to drive all of these efficiency numbers and performance numbers are just astronomical for an environment of this size, but it holds true at any size, as you see me go through the next couple. Within some of these engagements in the first 30 days during the POV, executing action, being able to drive uh, this amount in Oracle license avoidance or some of the power and cooling maintenance reduction, because we're able to shrink the footprint on what's really required to drive those performance numbers for the workload. We find that there was over provisioning over the years in some of these environments that we can instantly, in that first 45 minutes and over the course of a couple weeks, depending on planning for licensing models, we can get this full picture of what is that total total value for the client. And in this case, you see the numbers uh, pretty large for an on-prem. And even the FTE labor freed up because the software is making decisions in real time to avoid the alerting mechanisms and all of the performance problems. So
Yeah, and Jimmy, what I've seen here with this automaker, working with this automaker and a lot of large clients is over provisioning. Typically, they look at that as risk management, right? I have this extra headroom because I don't want to run out of capacity and I don't want to fail. And I think this is where we are showing with Turbo, you don't need as much headroom, and we will still assure performance. We will still make sure your lights are on and you don't fail. But not only that, you're still thriving, right? You're still thriving with a lot less. And I think that's the value that Turbo brings to the table. We are removing a lot of the what clients call as risk management or headroom for risk management. We show them that they don't really need that.
yeah, it's that idea that you can fly closer to the sun without being burned. In this case, we only have to increase 5, 10, 20% more utilization safely and still avoid that risk factor. That's a great call out. For this is an on-prem use case. Here's a use case that spans from on-prem to cloud with an OpenShift specific environment where you see a client leveraging during the POV. And I know as I bring this slide up, everyone's eyes gravitate toward the bottom right. It's almost a guarantee. I'm happy to start there because it's a pretty key and large number. 1.3 million in savings is critical. I mean that's like a no-brainer. But the piece that's actually more valuable is this was before they even spent $1 on the software. This was during the engagement with us to understand the opportunity. The client instantly said, we have some specific actions here that we can go and take that will drive better performance to my workloads, and I can save, in this case, 1.3 million. It was a no-brainer from the beginning, and you start to see things like scaling in these containerized environments, workload limits up to the tune of 17,000 limit scales. This is a beyond human scale type of a challenge, and where we see our clients leveraging the software to automate this is starting with that readout in a plan scenario where it's just simply, what is that opportunity ahead? Dissect some of the data points to say, is this viable? Is this safe? And then in this case, we're scaling things up and we're driving the cost savings. That's that trade-off mechanism that we started with on this journey today. And I think as we go through, you'll start to see this common theme of there is a way to manage, give more, and drive savings by way of what does the workload truly need to perform, and starting with that premise. So the breakdowns across all of the services that you see here, whether it's just native to OpenShift or in AWS, RDS, and EBS.
Yeah, and Jimmy, on this, I think two things I wanted to call out, right? This is a great slide and a great story. Whether you're in VMware or whether you're going to Kubernetes, we can start with you on your VMware journeys and move with you to Kubernetes. So that's one thing. And like Jimmy rightly pointed out, right? One of the things we mandate that clients do is start with us on a POV, right? And we want you to save money before we charge you any money. So in our POVs, we want you to take actions. And when you take actions, you actually save money. And that's how we want to engage with our clients out there. So if you're a new client and you're not using Turbo today and you're considering this is your first view of Turbo, we encourage you to actually take us up on a POV offer and actually save money on that POV before you actually decide to buy Turbo.
So we started with an on-prem story, transitioning to, hey, this, to Sean's point, spans not just your on-prem journey, but your hybrid cloud, your evolution journey. And then as we think about the cloud-related services that are out there, in this case, an AWS client in a 3-week POV realizing 460K in savings by way of the scaling actions that we put out in the system. And this is the low-hanging fruit, right? These are the things like unattached storage volumes. These are the build trust, we call them, that crawl related actioning around scaling storage volumes, because we know in some cases those are non-disruptive and reversible. And I'll get into that in specific in just a second here. But being able to start with a client, target a very small subset of their environment, and in 3 weeks deliver this type of value is truly unique. And it starts with that premise of tapping into the credentials from the AWS APIs in this case, and pulling in the utilization components and the spend, and being able to say, based on what you're spending and what this workload really needs, how can we get the best of both worlds?
Yeah, so I think in this example, I remember the client, we were able to even do simulation. We were able to even tell them which cloud is good for them. Based on the different contracts, we can actually within Turbo tell you whether AWS is cheaper for you or Azure is cheaper for you or for this particular workload. And I think we saw with the acquisition of Apptio, that Turbo is doing more and more of this use case, whereas Apptio and Cloudy, some of these tools are actually giving us insights and recommendations, and Turbo is actually helping clients to recapture value through being the action agent. So we're able to really realize the value of FinOps, and Turbo is bringing that FinOps into action.
John, before I jump into the demo, are there any questions that are lingering from the slides? Am I able to transition now over to showing this thing and how it actually works?
I think so far, no questions. I think you've been very clear and articulate, but if questions come up, I think we can definitely answer that. So good going so far, Jimmy. We are ready for the demo.
Okay. Let me switch to that.
Yes, I can confirm I see the screen now.
Okay, let me move the overlay from the Teams here so I can access the full. Okay, so we talked a bit about this idea and this concept of a supply chain. And as we jump into the technology, the main screen really wants to put that at the forefront, because this mapping is your client, your consumer of that service at the business app feeding in from an APM product of your choice. There's no only compatible with one or the other. Any APM product can be fed into the system via API and instantly have that application mapping through service, through whether it's a containerized component or straight to the database, the VM itself, all the way through the infrastructure, whether it's on-prem, if it's in the public cloud, you'll see the zones, the regions, and as it gets mapped through the data center. Your full hybrid cloud is this mapping in a supply chain, and all of the components are in real time, understood based on their performance profile. And that performance profile is what drives that trade-off mechanism that's going on in real time. So this supply chain is very much real. It's the piece to the core of the system, and it's what's going to then drive all of the actions that are in the system. So as I think about the pending actions center within the system, we have a breakdown of all of the things that we can do as practitioners, right? We can either delete something, we can go and in park it by a discounting mechanism or scale it in terms of optimizing a workload. But you see the breakdown in terms of resizing, scaling, deleting, moving, suspend, reconfigure, all the way through. And as the system is looking at in real time the performance profiles, we're then able to say, well, based on what a workload needs and is using, is it a good candidate for parking? And within the system, being able to have a very clear understanding of the things that are running for my dev team in the US versus the dev team on the other side of the globe, and being able to power certain workloads off when they're not in use, back on when they are in use, and having that full schedule being automated through parking. But then as we come back to the Action Center, being able to dive into all of the things that matter, whether it's that delete action for the workload or the volume that's no longer being used because someone powered off the actual workload and left the storage unattached, having that clear understanding of, hey, $100 in savings right now by taking this action, check the box, execute. So it's as simple as the system spitting out all of the prioritized actions that can be taken right now to drive the most value in a pre-ranked and prioritized way, and then having the ability to then automate down the road. And I'll jump to that in a moment. I spoke a little bit about the idea of scaling workloads, and I want to jump to the cloud here because this is a piece that I alluded to in the slide, but where our clients see the most value in terms of real-time savings. Within the Cloud Action Center, I have the ability to say, I can scale certain workloads. Let's start with the volumes. And the largest bang for value starts here with the first action. And in this first action, I have a volume, and I want to take you through the workflow in the value workflow that I think about based on my client interactions. There are two things that stand out to our clients in the way that we've outlined this: non-disruptive and reversible. When I talk about building trust, and we have client stories after client stories of folks taking action in that initial engagement, in the proof of value, it all starts with this ability to understand that certain workloads can be changed, value can be driven at a non-disruptive way, and let's say something were to be misconfigured during or post, it's reversible. So this is not that take this action and you kind of set it in stone. This is one of those, hey, we fully understand what this workload is using today, 160 horsepower. We can give it 3,000 horsepower. And by the way, we can give it more by moving from a specific config to the other. And we can save, in this case, $10 a month. So this is a performance saving with a performance improvement with a cost saving. And this is one of those, you can execute this right here by checking the box, hitting the green button. And more importantly, no one would know this was executed and the workload would perform better. Now, this is cool just looking at a table, but some folks on the call may be a little more technical and they want to understand how and why. How do we come up with this and why does it matter to me? Well, the reason why the system spits out this action on a technical level is we have the empirical data. We know what the consumption, the performance profile is for this workload. This volume, 95% of the time, is at 100% peaking. So we think about that percentile, which most clients can configure within that first 30, 60, 90, and even over the course of a year, taking in more peaks initially and slowly reducing that frequency of peak or lowering the percentile to say, hey, this workload is fighting for resources at some point in time throughout this 30 days. Why not give it a little bit more, in this case, 160 to 3,000 IOPS by moving from a standard to a GP3 and reduce the cost with no downtime, and it can be reverted if needed, no brainer. And these are the types of things that we would surface to the top in that first 45 minutes of configuration. And as we consume the data points over that 30 days, you can imagine that this gets a little bit more interesting.
And I think this, Jimmy, like you just laid it out, right, is where clients are able to mature through that building trust through Turbonomic, right, where they're slowly taking these non-disruptive reversible actions, and then they're moving on to higher levels of automation, going from few actions a day to hundreds, or if not, we have clients, more mature clients who are taking thousands of actions in a day. And I think this is where now you get more hands off, right? Your infrastructure is more on a cruise control. Only
Yeah,
when needed, it's pulling in a human. And that's the experience we want for all of our clients.
absolutely. And as you were speaking, I jumped over to the automation policy because when we think about the crawl, walk, run that exists, we start building trust in that deleting of unattached volumes, the scaling of the non-disruptive. For our clients that we see executing thousands of actions regularly, it's as simple as coming into the policy for volume and actually coming in and saying, hey, for the non-disruptive reversible scaling actions, let's actually take that off a manual and make it automated. And if we have to, or if the client has a specific workflow, which typically we see something like a ServiceNow, or for certain containerized workloads, integrating with something like a Terraform for the execution is critical. Having Turbo be the decision engine, being able to automate native in the platform and automate pushing to some external workflow is all native to the system. So what we typically see is our clients creating that schedule and that automation policy based on different segments of their environment and starting with the non-disruptive first. So
I like that. And I think like Jimmy laid out, right? Think of this as Turbo as the decision engine for both software as a code or infrastructure as a code. Whether like Jimmy said, we just did the Hashi acquisition and we have integration. Turbo has always been working with Terraform. We had that integration, but we're still building more around that integration. So like things like avoiding drift. There's a lot of exciting things coming in Turbo if you're a Terraform client.
So we talked a bit about specific actions, the action center. Sean, you alluded to something that's pretty near and dear to a lot of our clients' hearts, and it's the planning aspect. As I think about the planning over the 15 years that I've interacted with the platform, listening to our clients, there are use cases that are regular planning exercises that our clients go through, and this system being able to take that full supply chain and actually understanding how workloads being consumed in real time, creating performance profiles and knowing what every workload needs today and what it needed last Black Friday, last in open enrollment, last insert peak time for workload last year or over the course of the last 3 years, we can then start to think about how that real-time consumption will be managed in the future state of an environment. So being able to
exactly, yeah, like you said, right? Like what I've seen is if you go into AWS, this is just one cloud. There's like 10 or 15,000 different options that you can choose between compute, and then you don't know what is best for your contract. This is where Turbo integrates with the Apptio or Flexera or other tools, and we can tell you based on your contract, based on your entitlements, based on your usage, based on everything, here's the best instance for you. Like Jimmy said, right? This was the best instance for Black Friday. This was the best instance for you during your normal enrollment. Like seasonality, it takes everything into account. So there's a lot of power in this capability.
Yeah, and you can see all of the possible what if questions that we can go and ask, and our clients have been gravitating more toward that public cloud exercise to your point. But we have the ability to answer in real time, knowing the finite supply in the on-prem estate, knowing the possible costs from the discounting mechanisms in the public cloud. And as we think about savings plans and RIs, being able to pick the right amount and commit the right amount to these public cloud providers based on what you need today and what you possibly could need tomorrow is key. And that's where the system in real time can answer that and spit out some of these plans for you as well. So these are the things I wanted to touch on today as a start to finish, the problem we set out to solve to actually showing you how we solve it. The next 5 minutes, I can kind of go on mute here and see if there's any questions from the chat. And
so Jimmy, typically what I've seen, like maybe you can touch on this because you are also in the field out there working with our clients. If you look at FinOps, right, a lot of FinOps tools are out there. They're looking at the same thing, right? Reducing cloud spend, optimizing infrastructure. So they're going after similar kind of things. But one thing I've noticed, like working with engineers, working whether it's cloud engineers or infrastructure engineers or operators, they don't trust these FinOps tools as much. Help me understand why they trust Turbonomic more versus those tools, and how Turbonomic can actually bridge the gap between the engineering teams and the finance teams to achieve better optimization.
Yeah, I think it comes back to what you and I started to encroach on a little bit in the beginning of this conversation, which is being able to understand the implication of every change because we communicate with so many different pieces of this stack, because the supply chain is so comprehensive. We have that empirical data on consumption and cost. We know that if when you see something like this, the necessary investments and the potential savings based on these actions, we know that if we make a specific change to a workload, that workload will perform better. But on top of that, we know there are discounting mechanisms. We know that there are costs in real time. Unlocking that true elasticity of the cloud is only possible when you have a system capable of sizing up and down in near real time. And that's what these pending actions aim to set out to do. And why I start with this one, and I'll go back to it because it's just such a meaningful one to our clients. The ability to say, I know what this workload is consuming and has consumed and will consume, and I can scale this thing to a different configuration. I know the implication of this change for this workload, but more importantly, my entire cloud cost at large. And when we think about that decentralizing aspect of any one of your developers, any one of your practitioners can log in and deploy in the cloud and request services today, who's holding them accountable? Who's making sure that that workload is consuming what it needs? But more importantly, who's helping them, making sure that workload performs? So managing that trade-off between performance and cost, I think, is the answer to your question, Sean. I think showing this specifically with the empirical data across the application all the way down to that underlying resource is the only way to do it. And that's why Turbo is poised.
Thank you, Jimmy. And like Jimmy said this before, right? Plugging all this in, it's a very API-driven tool. Like getting like that supply chain view, getting all of these recommendations. It's very quick, like 45 minutes to an hour. We are up and off to the races. The information here gets richer over time because that way we can understand the workloads longer. We can look at the different dynamic nature, but out of the box, within an hour, all of these things start lighting up and you start getting insights. But typically we advise clients to run it over a period of a week, a business week, and then we are able to make richer and better recommendations. And often, like Jimmy said, we'd love for you to start with a POV, because in a POV, Turbo is a different way of doing things. So we know it's a culture shift for a lot of clients like you. And that's why the POV process is a great way for you to dip your toes into the Turbo world and see it for yourself, right? It comes to life in your environment. It comes to the savings come to life, especially we do on-prem, but when you really plug it into the cloud, it's real savings, right? It's real hard dollars. And again, I think Jimmy said this over and over again, our North Star is performance, but because we assure performance really well and we do it in a very efficient way, savings is a good bonus that you get, right? Because we're doing performance at in an efficient way, we are driving savings. So most times clients will say, is Turbo a cost saving tool? I'll say, no, it's a performance engine, but cost savings is a nice bonus that you get with it. Any more questions for Jimmy or me, or any feedback, any areas where you've used Turbo and where you see where you've either built trust? Like recently, I can share a story as we queue up more questions. I was in a user forum in Latin America, and we were talking to existing Turbo clients, and I asked them, like, what do you love about Turbo? One of the things they said is, we trust Turbo so much that we are actually taking more and more actions. And they said, we trust it because we see the data behind it. It's not a black box like a lot of AI solutions out there. We can actually see, like like Jimmy showed you some of the turbo screens, right? We see where the peaks are, what the implications of an action are. So it's very transparent. So it helps you in that journey, and I think that's the feedback we got. And so clients are using us a lot more with Terraform, are using us more in AWS. So the applications of Turbo are growing more and more, and especially Jimmy started this off, right? APM and observability is growing, but clients are spending tens of millions of dollars there and still left hanging in a lot of cases. And I think that's where Turbo is a good strategy. I look at Turbo as an insurance policy on your APM. So if you're investing tens of millions in an APM, investing some dollars in Turbo gives you like a good insurance policy. Any closing comments, Jimmy? I know our team will also put out a poll so that you can give us feedback. But Jimmy, over to you to wrap this up.
Yeah, the only thing I would close with is kind of what I opened up with, and I think it's the ability to say there are some pretty fundamental, rudimentary challenges that we see at managing IT's core and those trade-offs. And if we take a step back and say, why are we monitoring for more data? If it's simply to hand it off to the human, as we think about the scaling of these environments, it's just a beyond human scale challenge. And having a piece of software that can avoid that break fix loop is a better approach to managing IT. So thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to working with some of you.
Jimmy, and thank you, everyone. We will see you in the next session. And again, take us up on these offers, like bring Turbo into your environment and prove it out, right? We're not going to charge you anything till we save you money. So thank you, everyone.